Welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Brendan Boyle, Chief Executive of the Ministry of Social Development. As tempting as it might be to try and outline all the roles that he has filled in the last over 30 years of public service, I just want to quickly focus on a few key achievements. In 2002, in his capacity as Director of the e-Government Unit within the State Services Commission, Brendan oversaw a highly collaborative and innovative approach in creating New Zealand's first government web portal. As Chief Executive of Land Information New Zealand, he successfully guided the Land Online project to completion, with 7 million paper records becoming digital records, and customer service and information requests moving to an online platform. In 2008, he took on the challenge of integrating the National Library and Archives New Zealand into the Department of Internal Affairs and was the government's CIO, providing strategic advice on ICT matters. During his time at DIA, he was responsible for the provision of policy advice on Auckland's governance reforms and the subsequent amalgamation of 8 councils into one. He also managed the civil defence emergency response to the Christchurch earthquake. Since joining the Ministry of Social Development in 2011, he has delivered significant welfare reform and seen social housing assessments come under his responsibility. Brendan is more than just an experienced leader of change with a willingness to utilise technology. He is also a husband and father, keenly involved in his children's academic and sporting endeavours, and those of his own, as a fine captain of at least two high-performing cricket teams that I'm aware of. Please join me in warmly welcoming Brendan to the stage.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everyone. 2 high-performing cricket teams. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but Frank has joined with me in one of those teams. It's vintage cricket, Masters cricket. It's called vintage for a reason, and it's something to do with the age profile of most of the participants. I also happen to manage my son's cricket team, and after 3 losses in a row, my 16-year-old daughter said, "God, Dad, you're supposed to have a postgraduate degree in management. What's going wrong?" Nothing like your kids and sort of keeping you down to earth. But let me talk a little bit today about what's been happening with the Ministry of Social Development, because we've been on quite an interesting path since I joined in the last few years, with a lot happening. So as Frank indicated, I came into the role in 2011, and my number one priority, which I shared with the staff at the time, was building our organisational culture. Now back then, I got quite a few blank stares in response. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't now. For the past couple of years, we've focused on very significant and widespread change across every part of the ministry. Now, the culture part of that change underpins everything we're doing to navigate through the challenges that we face. We've called it Building Blue, and that's the story I want to share with you today. Just a little bit of context, though, about the Ministry of Social Development for those of you who don't deal with us. We're the largest government department in New Zealand. We provide services and assistance to over 1 million Kiwis and around about 100,000 families every day. Our people range from vulnerable children and families to job seekers and superannuitants. For any of you who are over 65, you will be clients of ours if you are receiving the National Super. And of course, whole communities. At some point, we touch the lives of every single Kiwi. And as an agency, we account for about a quarter of the public sector. We administer around $22 billion each year, which is about a third of government expenditure. We're a payment agency, but our big focus and where we get the big outcomes is finding people jobs and supporting vulnerable children and families. Across our 300 sites and our 10,000 staff, that's what gets them out of bed every day, and I don't say that lightly. Our people are public servants who believe in what they do, putting us in the top quartile of organisations internationally with a shared sense of purpose. Now, the tagline for this conference is that disruption is the catalyst for change, and that has certainly been the case at MSD. For us, the disruption wasn't a burning platform, but a rising tide of external forces, some which were decades in the making. But it was the global financial crisis of 2008 that really put the spotlight on that water level. the GFC shrunk public resources even as it intensified demand for services. In a single year, for example, client numbers at work and income doubled. That pressure shone a light on cracks that were easier to ignore in fatter times. And what it did show was a sector that was increasingly unfit to deal with the issues that New Zealand was facing today. The social issues that face us as a society are increasingly complex. Since the 1970s, we've seen a growing tale of long-term benefit dependency. Instead of being a safety net, the system was more like a fishing net. People were being trapped, especially sole parents and those who entered the system in their teens. When people are on benefit or a low income, they're likely to struggle, as you can imagine, with a host of other issues. Their kids are more likely to be poorly educated, unhealthy, depressed, into crime, and likely unemployed. For some, unfortunately, those challenges and features have become intergenerational and community-wide. So between 2011 and 2013, we delivered the biggest reform our welfare system had seen in 50 years. We radically changed the way we work and who we work with, but it wasn't just the welfare system that needed to change. Our entire public management model is focused on vertical accountability and bottom line performance of government agencies. It's often been described as siloed and competitive. So from a member of the public perspective, it means knocking on multiple doors, giving personal information over and over again to multiple agencies. It means duplication in some places and gaping holes in others. The type of issues that are facing so many vulnerable families and individuals make it clear that no single organisation working in isolation can meet those needs alone. So in the aftermath of the GFC, we faced up to the need and expectation that the entire social sector has to change the way it works and thinks. In a leaner environment, we've had to redesign and connect our services around the people that we're charged with providing services to, with shared goals, shared plans, and shared resourcing. And not just across government, but particularly beyond, into the economy and communities. So pretty challenging, but it gets even trickier. MSD sounds like one organisation, but if you scratch the surface, you'd find a collection of independent business groups, cobbled together over a decade or more, each focused on its own services, with its own structures, its own systems, its own processes, and its own ingrained ways of working and thinking, its own cultural attributes. So how could we collaborate and innovate and preach that across the entire social sector when we weren't even connecting within the organisation with our own shared members of the public? If we were going to be part of, let alone lead a shift across the entire sector, it was clear that we had to get our own house in order first. So that's why the leadership team started to tell and sell the story for self-driven change, describing the challenges that we faced and why that has meant that we've had to think and work differently. Step by step, gradually, we are building ourselves into a different sort of organisation, one that works as a whole, not in silos, one that delivers connected services to help children, to help young people, families and communities. It's a significant multi-layered shift. Our structure, our governance, our leadership, our operating systems and our processes, the way we use technology and the way we share information. And underpinning it all, of course, is the way that we think and act, all 10,000 of us as one team. That's the culture bit. That's my number one challenge as Chief Executive. When I joined MSD, I spent a lot of time listening to people. There was no doubt that across the organisation, people had an appetite for change. I asked all our staff to answer two questions. What were they most proud of? And what was standing in their way, which they would most like to change? Now, overwhelmingly, the positive was an incredibly widespread pride and commitment to our purpose and to making a difference for people to help them to become independent. Now, on the negative side was a slightly longer list. Silos, a focus on process over results, the fear of not being perfect at all times, low trust, a hierarchy which disempowered staff to make decisions, sign-off processes and risk management approaches that actually undermined personal accountability rather than ensured it. I vividly remember one person telling me, this was his quote, "You don't put anything up to the leadership team until you've taken out advice insurance," which was a wonderful quote. Certainly wasn't the environment to support change, let alone lead innovation and collaboration. So where did we start? We engaged all staff in a project to rewrite our purpose and principles. I wanted to get people thinking about why we exist and the values we needed to encourage an outward focus, collaboration, client-centric and innovative. We needed to break down those silos, both structurally and culturally in particular. We need to challenge the sense of hierarchy which disabled some of our best people and put too much on the shoulders of too few. We needed an environment where personal responsibility, achievement and integrity were more important than process, hierarchy and rules, where it was the norm to improve and innovate, where the acid test was, is this going to be better for the people of New Zealand? We began to make plans with Frank and the team, branding and launching our Building Blue project in close alignment with our purpose and principles. The results of our culture surveys were no great surprise. We showed a strong perfectionist and conventional culture with a fear of failure and subsequent blame feeding into risk-averse thinking. But on the plus side, we had a very strong shared sense of purpose, results that were at least consistent right across the organisation, and the overwhelming message that people wanted to be involved in finding better ways to do things. In other words, we all wanted the same thing, across the entire country, across service lines, from the front line right through to the leadership. So it was a really good foundation for change. And what we've gained from Human Synergistics is a common language, a framework, process and tools to help us do that. Plus, I'm from Otago, so my default setting is blue anyway, so it just seemed kind of fortuitous. We launched Building Blue with trained staff advocates running workshops across the organisation. In the regions, the uptake was really quick and enthusiastic. Faster, I might note, than in head office. I'm sure you'll identify with that. We initially fielded queries about whether it was okay to do more. But people soon got the idea that we actually trusted and wanted them to take ownership of this. As I said, National Office was a slightly more constipated bureaucracy. Our 1,600 staff in Wellington have been a little slower, perhaps needed a little bit of fibre in the diet to engage. However, we're getting there. I'm a bit of a rugby fan, and sports team culture absolutely fascinates me. Winning a World Cup in any sport is really a coincidence, and I was intrigued to learn about the close similarity in values and culture between the All Blacks and the World Cup winning German football team. Both teams have emerged from adversity and developed through a process of continuous improvement. Both coaches have looked far and wide for their influences and talents, recognising the importance of character in addition to talent. Both Hansen and Lowe have rotated their players intelligently. They've used substitutes decisively. Each espouses a collective mentality which diminishes the distractions of individual brilliance. The team is the star. The All Blacks are so determined not to be enslaved by the cult of personality that people like Richie McCaw and Dan Carter take their turn to sweep out the dressing rooms after practice. Personal discipline and humility become second nature. Mutual trust and respect evolves naturally. Everyone does their bit for the success of the team. I saw this quite graphically on television the week before the All Blacks played the USA in Chicago when they named their team. All the All Blacks, I think, were quite excited to be in Chicago. They were all looking forward to the possibility of playing at Soldier Field, which is quite an iconic American sports ground. And for many of these people, it was a different experience. And for a guy like Richie McCaw, who's played 120 odd test matches and played on grounds all around the world, this was going to be a unique experience. They named the team and Richie wasn't in it. He was having a break. So the reporter said to Steve Hansen, well, you haven't named Richie, how does he feel about that? And Steve Hansen said, doesn't matter how he feels, he doesn't pick the team. So the reporter was like, oh, okay, I get it. He's sending very clear messages all the time. The team is above individuals. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how many games you've played, doesn't matter how good you are, you're part of the team and you make decisions in the best interests of the team. So the All Black example is obvious. From the senior players to the newest guys on the field, any organisation needs to walk the talk and to do it visibly. Earlier this year, we pulled together 200 MSD leaders at a Blue Leadership Forum. Each member of the senior team stood up and talked openly about their own personal leadership styles. They shared their circumplex, their 360 feedback, their development plans and the changes that they were working on. Steve Hansen would say the work-ons. As a leadership team, we've also published our own pact on the ways that we have agreed to work together and with others. One of the things that we shared that we decided to do, as a leadership team on a monthly rotation basis, we've appointed what we call a Blue Angel. At every meeting we spend, when we're together as a leadership team, we take 10 minutes at the end of the meeting and we ask the Blue Angel, give us some feedback. And one member of the leadership team does that on a monthly basis. And I've got to say, at the beginning, there was a degree of sort of somewhat shifting nervously in seats as we were getting feedback about some of the talking over one another and the paying more attention to cell phones and some of those other little behavioural norms which we had identified that we wanted to do better with. And gradually, people are getting used to that. It's real-time feedback. It's not in writing. It's not a month after it happens. It's in the same meeting. And I think it's been a really effective way for us to think differently about our own team culture. We're talking about trust, about openness and accountability, and we're just about to start publishing all our governance team minutes and agendas on the staff intranet for all 10,000 staff to read. So that's a step outside the comfort zone for some, for many. But we've thought it through, and the reality is that we cannot possibly expect staff to take these kind of steps unless we're seen to be doing it. We've also devolved a lot of our decision-making wider than just the senior leadership team. By changing our governance structure, we've created a much wider pool of high-level decision-makers amongst our next tier of leaders. And we've brought a collective, collaborative, one ministry oversight to those decisions. We're trying to lead in a way that shows people that we're not thinking like this, but in the same boat together. And sometimes it's the smaller things that send the signals to staff. Every election, we write substantial briefings for our incoming ministers. The BIM, the Briefing for Incoming Minister as it's known. This year, for the first time, our BIM was a single document to reflect us as a single organisation, rather than multiple BIMs for each separate service line going to each separate minister. Now, I discovered that traditionally producing a BIM in MSD is a dreaded and hated task and hasn't been a particularly enjoyable experience for those who'd been involved in the past. So we pulled together the team of people across the organisation who were tasked with doing this, and at the beginning of that process, I got them all together and said we were going to do this differently this time. We agreed that not only were we going to create a single BIM, but it would be a more positive experience for the staff and it would be done differently. We wanted them to work together as a team. We wanted them to support one another. We wanted them to trust in each other's expertise. We weren't going to be sweating the small stuff in terms of the Council of Perfection. We wanted a quality product and we got one, but probably more importantly, we wanted a positive experience for those staff that were involved in it. And we wanted them to talk about that around the organisation, which they have been doing. Disruption and adversity. Well, a few weeks back, a couple of months ago now, we faced a situation that tops the list of things that you hope you'll never have to face. I was about to board a plane in Auckland when my phone rang, and it was the Deputy Police Commissioner telling me that there'd been a shooting in our Ashburton site. One staff was injured and 2 were dead. I, as you can imagine, was completely taken aback. I said to Viv Rickard, first, are you sure? How correct is this information? And he said, I'm very sure. I've spoken directly to the people on site, and this is what has happened. I rang our minister at the time, Paula Bennett, and she's a very upbeat character, as you will know. You've seen her a lot on television and stuff, and she answered the phone. It's Monday morning. Hi, how are you? I said, not good. She said, oh, what's happened? And I said, this is what's happened. She gasped, not surprisingly, and I said, look, I've got to go and get my plane because I'm coming back to Wellington, then trying to get a connection down to Christchurch. I've got to go, but I'll be in touch. The office will be in touch as soon as we've got more information. Jumped on the plane, I was just about to turn my phone off, and it rung, and it was her. And she said, look, I just had to ring you back. I need to double check. Did you really tell me this? And I said, yes, unfortunately I did, and we've got to prepare ourselves for the worst. So we connected up in Wellington and ended up heading down to Christchurch and on to Ashburton, where we both stayed for the next few days, supporting staff who were traumatised, as you could imagine, turning up to work as a administrative person, and some guy bursts into the office with a pump-action shotgun and shoots dead 2 of your colleagues and wounds a 3rd. So, as traumatic as you could imagine in any office situation. So I was down there, but meanwhile back in Wellington, people stepped seamlessly into the breach. 2 of our senior leaders, including the person who was the head of work and income, were out of the country. One was in Europe, and we were furiously trying to get messages to her, which the Swiss authorities managed to do in their very efficient way and managed to get her on a plane. So I can't remember, I think she had about 65 hours of straight flying by the time she got back to New Zealand. But people stepped up. A response team of key decision makers came together around one table, not just senior leaders, but those with the right skills and the capability to help us deal with this. Then we had all of these escalating copycat threats. With a really shaken front line, we had about 700 serious threats in the next few weeks. These were people ringing up and complaining about things and saying, I'm on my way with a gun. These were bomb threats. There was actually what we thought was a bomb that was left in one of our sites. So, we had all sorts of things. Some guy turns up at the office brandishing a machete. You could imagine people's nerves were somewhat frayed, to put it mildly. But people did what they needed to do to support the staff, to support the minister, and to support me. It was well outside of precedent. You can talk all you like, you can do your risk assessments, you can scenario plan, you can practice, you can do all sorts of things, but not until you're actually faced with something like that and it's real, do you know how people are going to react. And in reality, I could not have hoped for a better response nor better support from that leadership team. People stepped up, joined up, and did the right things in the right way. And I'm absolutely sure that the Building Blue project helped a lot in building some of those foundations. And it truly gives me hope for what we can achieve as an organisation in the future. I keep telling staff, culture change is a long game and we're only really at the beginning. We've set our target to reach our preferred culture at 2021, but we know that's optimistic. It's an aspirational goal, and so it should be. Next year we'll resurvey, and I'll be surprised if we haven't seen a positive shift and a bluer circumplex. Blue's certainly becoming part of the language around the organisation. Got to say, our current government loves the term. We've got a solid plan in place to build a deeper understanding, and that's what we're focusing on now, going deeper. How do we make it real, every day, for everyone? We're just about to launch a ministry-wide campaign on that. The material that you can see is just part of that in terms of some of the collateral. We're also investing in our leaders and our people managers, building their capability to lead and to model the culture that we're talking about. And of course, in a place of 10,000 people, it's their words and actions that will create the context where people can succeed through disruption and deal with the challenges that we face. Finally, going back to disruption and that rising tide that I talked about, they say a rising tide floats all ships, and I'd like to qualify that. Some ships may be swamped by the tide. That is an issue, and your crew are on board, that you're ready to cut the moorings if that's what you need to do and set sail into the blue. William Shakespeare, he put it far more gracefully than I do when he wrote, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures." Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy the day.